studying of history, and I've studied the corptocracy of kleptocrats that we have running things, and they are definitely clinically ill from a case of megalomaniacal chutzpah, megalomaniacal bravado, megalomaniacal craziness. I mean, look at Corzine, 40-to-1 bet, other people's money, lies before Congress, gets caught lying, and now the entire corporate media structure, the whole system is coming out and saying, we don't know where the money went. And as I pointed out 3 months ago when this all started, it was in Forbes, it was in the Associated Press that most of the money had been wired to London to J.P. Morgan. But then I guess J.P. Morgan said, hey, don't say it came to us, just say it's a mystery where it went. And so now everybody says we don't know where it went, and federal regulators are in the news, the financial news, every week saying, gee, we don't know where it is. Now, if you wire $1,000, there's a record of it. You wire $10,000, there is a criminal investigation opened called a suspicious transactions report. It's a global rules. Homeland Security runs the whole thing worldwide. It's standardized because the globalists want to know where money is going so they can steal it. They only shut down the drug dealers they want to shut down. They only shut down the money launderers they want to shut down. Goldman Sachs, all these people that are involved taking over countries, they're conquerors. They're crooks, and that's what Max is talking about. And now they're playing along like they don't know where the money went when it's public where it went. And the so-called media is playing along. I mean, Max, that's what's really frightening here. It's not just that the globalists are thieves. It's that just like Caligula or Hitler or anybody, they get so arrogant they start going wild and always bring themselves down, but generally they bring tens of millions down with them. You know, democide in the 20th century, Max, killed more people than anything else, and it's an academic term, well known in academia, but not ever on the news. Of course, that's death by government. They killed 264 million people last century conservatively, Max, not counting warfare, not counting troop casualties. With this type of insanity at this level, what's coming next?
Well, you know, just to be clear, again, the significance of the MF Global story and my experience as a stockbroker on Wall Street for many years, there was a barrier called segregated accounts that no lunatic who even was bent all the rules or broke all the rules, you would never go into a segregated customer account. It's heavily coded as such within the system and steal money. I mean, of all the crimes that we did forgery all the time. We did all kinds of criminal behavior. I mean, every single stop, by definition, if you have your Series 7's license, you are a criminal. That's pretty much the business model of Wall Street. And I've told you some of the tricks that we used to use, look-back trades and other things we used to use to just print money all day long. But when you go into the segregated account and just steal from a customer like that, that's a whole nother dimension to this history of bank collapse and criminality that we've seen when the Lehman Brothers collapsed and the big TARP bailout that Hank Paulson engineered by threatening Congress with martial law. I mean, this is a new chapter, and it literally means that people's bank accounts and their brokerage accounts are not safe from the meddling fingers of somebody who simply can reach in there and steal their money. And this is something that is just a new chapter. So anybody who had an escape plan, and I noticed I just saw a story on Reuters, and I sent you the link. The number of people who are renouncing their U.S. citizenship in the last 12 months has skyrocketed. People are getting out of the U.S., they are renouncing their citizenship, and they're getting out of the United States. They don't trust the United States. Anyone with any means at all is leaving. The embassies are chock-a-block. They're stuffed with people trying to get to their exit interviews, because in order to renounce your citizenship, you have to go into the embassy or an affiliated institutional branch, and you have to go through an exit interview, and they then give you a certificate which formally you have renounced your citizenship, and from that moment forward, the U.S. is no longer has claim to you. But the number of people at embassies around the world who are waiting to do this, they can't handle the volume. Anyone who's really got anything to protect realizes that when, for example, they shut down Switzerland, why? Because those American banks wanted to get into the money laundering business. The American banks wanted to get into the secret bank account business. It's not that Switzerland was closed down as a place to launder money or hide money. No, the United States, the Wall Street banks wanted that business for themselves.
Well, more than that, Max, as you know, they admit, and I was just playing a clip earlier about this global government they want to get all the little guys' money. Somebody who put $20 million in over 30 years, that sounds like a lot to most people. That's nothing to a globalist who's stolen tens of billions. They want to rob all the little guys, and you notice when they have gone after Swiss banks, it's always, for $2, $3, $5, $10 million. It's always just setting that precedent. But expanding on that, Max, and looking at this, I ran into some of the family, and after I met them and talked to them, I went and looked them up. It really was them, of John Wayne's kids, some of John Wayne's children, famous actor. And they were leaving the United States and selling everything they had. They had a ranch outside Austin, and well, that was 2 years ago. They've now left the United States to Costa Rica. And I asked them why, and they said because the government's going to raise taxes and rob everybody, and it's changing the rules, and all the money's leaving. And I've talked to a lady who is worth over $3 billion, owned one of the biggest defense contractor companies, one of the richest women in the world. I'm going to just leave it at that. I probably already said who it is with that information. And she left the country 4 years ago and said the United States will not exist, and you're going to be huge because everything you're saying is going to come true. And if you live, you're going to be the biggest thing in media out there. And I said, why? And she said, because you're 100% on target. And then I went and looked her up, and it was her. So, but see, that's not like, oh, great, I've been right. It's horrible news, Max. The money is running like they're scared to death. What are they scared of?
Well, first of all, it's not about taxes or raising taxes. It's more about what you see at the TSA now. We get reports all the time about TSA agents just stealing money and shaking people down, basically, and stealing property. And this is now becoming endemic throughout the U.S. in every tier, right up to the level of J.P. Morgan. Jamie Dimon, who runs J.P. Morgan, stealing money from MF Global clients. And by the way, that number I just saw a report was raised again to $1.6 billion that they say that they can't find. It's an incredible economy where Walmart can tell you where a razor blade they sold 3 years ago is in a landfill somewhere with some RFID tag. But the major bank on Wall Street has misplaced $1.6 billion. I mean, that's an amazing admission in this day and age where everything is known by everyone on the corporation front and on Wall Street. But you've got right up from the top, the Jamie Dimons of the world, right down to the TSA agent. They simply now steal. Stealing has become legitimized. I've said since I've been coming on your show that the closest antecedent to what's happening in the U.S. has got to be Argentina, 2000, 2001. And there's a brilliant 12-part series on YouTube, a documentary, where they show the rich loading up trucks, armored vehicles, and driving the money out of Buenos Aires, leaving the people with nothing but pots and pans. And if you look what's happening in Greece, this is exactly what just happened in Greece. Those people had $400 billion of their GDP stolen. They're sitting there with pots and pans now. They've got nothing.
And it's not even their debt again, and they admit the mega banks that did it, that infiltrated their government, are now taking over the country, and they're not going to be able to vote anymore.
Well, look, in Argentina, that was the template. The debt was from Citibank that the Argentinian government nationalized, and they passed a law. And of course, it's all legal. This is what you always hear. It's completely legal. They nationalized all this foreign debt, and then they forced it onto the people in the terms of austerity. Same thing in Greece. Same thing in all of these situations where you find the IMF and the other troika members meddling around, involved in these massive scams. And in the U.S., of course, now you see it happening with the TSA agent is a perfect metaphor for what's happening throughout the entire economy, right up to the CEO's office of the biggest banks in America. They simply steal your money. They're not doing some leveraged, a derivatives trade as a way to move risk from one balance sheet to another as keeping liquidity or making a market. No, none of that is happening. They're just stealing. And this has gone to the point where people now are renouncing their U.S. citizenship in record numbers. Since they started tracking this, the number has never been higher. It's up 200 or 300% from last year. And the lines and embassies around the world to renounce U.S. citizenship are growing every single day.
How bad is it going to get?
Well, I mean, in the U.S., the U.S. is in a very interesting position because it has been the chief beneficiary of these banking scandals for decades. And what I mean by that is that in the U.S., the price of energy and food is still, compared to other countries, very cheap. So somebody making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year can actually have a reasonable life because lifestyle even, because the cost of energy and food as compared with these other countries is still relatively is cheap because the U.S. has the reserve currency and because so much of the U.S. economy is subsidized. You know, when the Republicans say they hate big government, that is a big joke because the economy of the U.S. is nothing but underwritten and subsidized by big government. The agriculture industry, you talked about the Mexican Coca-Cola being sweeter than the American Coca-Cola and the high fructose corn syrup. That's because corn is subsidized by big government to the point where the price of corn is so cheap that they inject it into food into America, and 60% of every calorie you take in the United States is from high fructose corn syrup. Because of the underwriting that comes from the government.
They just come in and lobby the corporations and the food makers to put it in there, basically giving it to them. And it's the same thing with fluoride in the water, everything. Right, so special interests come in and make you do this.
The price of food ends up being extraordinarily cheap. It's horrible for you, and you end up having to take supplements to survive, but the basic food at the fast food joint is incredibly cheap. Same thing for energy. Oil prices do not reflect the world market because it got wars going on all over the world. The biggest buyer of gasoline is the Pentagon. They spend $230 million a day on gas. To gas up all those vehicles for the Pentagon, to go into all these countries and just shoot people indiscriminately because for fun, $230 million a day they spend on gas. Okay, now to keep that flowing, they've got relationships with Saudi Arabia, which, of course, then you open up that whole Mideast quandary, and you see how the propaganda comes out and how we're targeting Iran and why Syria is bad, but Bahrain is good. And, you end up in this incredible quagmire.
Well, let me raise that for you and then go to calls, Max, because that's the next issue I wanted to raise with you here today. Why is the establishment so arrogant that they're openly putting al-Qaeda in charge in the areas of Syria they've invaded, al-Qaeda in charge of Libya, al-Qaeda now being put in everywhere, and the media admitting that the U.S. and Israel are using al-Qaeda terror groups? That was in NBC News a few nights ago. Like it's a good thing. Like I've got to have a pot-bellied pervert grab my genitals and try to grope my children at the airport and go after my wife because terrorists are everywhere, al-Qaeda, but al-Qaeda openly works for the government. But then I'm bad to say 9/11's an inside job.
Well, al-Qaeda worked for the government, to fight the Russians in Afghanistan. Bin Laden was working for the U.S., and then he wasn't working for the U.S., and now the al-Qaeda is working for the U.S. And the history of the U.S. foreign policy is like this. They flip and swap. There's no ideology behind it. It's simply empire out there trying to get secure resources for the cheapest possible price. That's the whole methodology to it. There is no ideology. There is no democracy building, none of that happens. You know, they've got drones just destroying schools. They're not out there building schools. They're just out there securing oil because the price of oil in the U.S., even at $4 or $4.50 a gallon, is incredibly cheap compared to Europe. You know, it's $12, $13, $14 a gallon now to buy gas in Paris.